It is Rabbi Sachs coming to you from the Chai Center, and welcome to the Chai Academy. We're in the midst of a course, Fascinating Jewish Personalities, and this is, I don't know, the 20th, I'm not sure, to be honest, but yesterday we discussed the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and today's course is going to be on another rabbi, Rabbi Stephen Samuel Weiss, or Wise. So it's interesting because he was a personality, and he was born in 1874, and he was very influential in 1920s, 30s, 40s, etc. In fact, in the 1920s and 30s, if somebody wrote a letter to Rabbi USA and they mailed it, it got delivered to Rabbi Wise, which is fascinating. In other words, when they write Rabbi USA, it doesn't come to Rabbi Sachs, right? I don't get it, but he got it. Rabbi USA, it was delivered to him. So he was born in Budapest, and he is the son and grandson of rabbis and great rabbis. His father's name was Aaron, and his father was both a PhD and an ordained rabbi. His maternal grandfather, and this is an interesting story, his maternal grandfather owned a business. It was porcelain business, I think. And now Aaron Weiss, which is Stephen Weiss's father, worked for the company. That's his father-in-law's company. And he wanted to unionize the company. And he was very progressive, ahead of his time. And this is where Stephen got it from also, from his father. He wanted to unionize the company and, get shorter hours and better pay, etc. So his father-in-law bought one-way tickets for the family, him and his wife and his son, who we're talking about, and shipped him to New York. Get out of here. You ever heard the expression, I want to buy you a one-way ticket? So he did. He bought a one-way ticket for his family because they were trying to cause trouble in his business. So his father became a rabbi in Brooklyn, and then his father became a conservative rabbi in Manhattan. The synagogue is called Rodef Shalom, still in existence today. I think the Brooklyn synagogue, I think it's also in existence today. Stephen, who we're talking about himself, he was educated in public school, then flew to Austria, spent some time there, being ordained and by Reform rabbis, and then came back to the United States, where he was the rabbi of Bnei Yeshurun. And then, after he was a rabbi in Bnei Yeshurun, Bnei Jeshurun, which is in Manhattan today, very progressive Reform synagogue, he then got a position in Oregon. Now, Oregon was extremely liberal state, and he was an extremely liberal, progressive rabbi, so it was a good fit. He was one of the people that founded NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. There were quite a few Jews who founded, literally were there on the ground up, and it wasn't, you took your life in your own hands when you were vocal at that point. And he was one of the founders, as was Walter Sachs, Henry Moskowitz, but he was Lillian Wald. He was one of the founders, and so he was in Oregon, and he actually came up. Temple Emmanuel in New York City was looking for a rabbi, and it was almost like the pinnacle of one's career is to be the senior rabbi of Temple Emmanuel. Not the pinnacle of my career, but the pinnacle of his career. and he turned it down. He withdrew his name because at that time he felt he said, is the rabbi, is the pulpit free or is it not free? It's a very famous case he laid out against the Reform movement, and he actually broke away from the Hebrew Union College because he resented the fact that the board of directors had to approve of his weekly sermon. In other words, he wrote it, he had to submit it for approval. And he says, that's not free. I'm not allowed to talk about what I want. And therefore, I don't want to be the rabbi of such a synagogue. So he withdrew his name. And he says, and it was a whole tumult then. Are the synagogues free? Are they not free? Does the rabbi have to, go everything by the board or not? And he actually, he founded the Stephen Weiss Free Synagogue, right? And it was free because you didn't have to battle the board with everything. And it was also free where you could sit. The rich and the poor could sit alike, which definitely agree with. And it was also that, I don't know what it is now. When he founded it, there was no dues. There was no due structure. And so he founded that synagogue, and there's quite a few Stephen Weiss Free synagogues all over the country. But that's what he started. He was, as we said, so he broke with the reform, but he was also he was, in general, he was very, very progressive fellow. However, he was a pro-Zionist reform-esque rabbi. Very, very rare. Basically, the Reform rabbis, now Reform synagogues, yeah, of course they're Zionists. Of course they're pro-Israel. Of course they'll attend rallies, if Israel is picked on. But it wasn't common back then. And he was pro-Zionist. There was something called the Pittsburgh platform that took place, where you basically, they wanted, the Pittsburgh platform was initiated by Reform rabbis who wanted Jews at that time to really integrate and assimilate. So for you to brandish your Israel banner made you separate, and they didn't want you to be separate. However, Rabbi Weiss, Stephen Weiss, said, no, you have to be pro-Zionist. This is in the 20s, in the 30s. And he was pro-Zionist. And in fact, he was the founder of the Federation of the American Zionists, which eventually became the Zionist Organization of America, the ZOA. He was very involved in the Second Zionist Congress, in which took place in Basel in Switzerland, and he was a delegate, which once again the Reform at that time were not into. In 1917, he was very involved in trying to get Woodrow Wilson to accept the Balfour Declaration and to push it. The Balfour Declaration, of course, is to it's also known as the White Paper, to allow immigration into Israel. So he pushed heavily. He wasn't so successful. And people felt, his critics felt, he wasn't forceful enough. Einstein was a good friend of his, because Einstein said, well, here you have a man who's a rabbi, and he's pro-Zionism. That spoke to Einstein. So in 1922, he formed the Institute for Religious Teachings, religion, Hebrew Religion Institute, something like that. Institute of Religious, I don't know what. And it was separate from the Hebrew Union College. and it was a separate university where they ordained rabbis. When Because he didn't like the Hebrew Union College for a few reasons, eventually it merged into the Hebrew Union College after his death. In 1924, he was picked as as a delegate for the Democrat National Convention. He was actually a delegate from New York at the convention. Where he was really on the cutting edge, where what makes him an amazing leader, was that in 1933, when Hitler reared his ugly head, and Hitler started to pick on Jews. This is way before Kristallnacht. But this is, Hitler was starting to talk about Jews and started to boycott German Jews. It wasn't in Europe at that time. It was just Germany. So he led, much to the chagrin of other Jewish leaders, he led something called a Jewish boycott against Germany. Others were worried, oi, what will the Gentiles say? Oi, what will Hitler say? What will Hitler do? He said, we cannot be silent. And it's a very famous comment. He says, because it's not against the German Jews. He was clairvoyant. This is against Jews, which his prophecy actually came to fruition. Hitler didn't only target the German Jews. The more power he got, the more he targeted Jews. Poland, so he targeted the Polish Jews. Lithuanian Jews. So he was right, Rabbi Weiss. And he led a boycott. And it was a very vocal boycott, very extremely vocal. And other Jewish leaders cowered in fear of, which was terrible. But he didn't. He was friendly with, very friendly with FDR. And FDR actually bounced many of his ideas off of him. His critics say that he wasn't able to convince FDR to publicly to publicly stand up and condemn Germany for what they were doing in the early years of the war. In other words, in 1941, 1940, 1939. And people were critical of him because they said that he didn't do enough. He didn't do enough to convince FDR to stand up and say publicly, I stand for the Jewish people, and I am absolutely abhor what Hitler's doing, and they felt he didn't go far enough. He took another bold statement. In 1942, he held a press conference, and not just one, other press conferences, that he got wind of a famous telegram that was sent to the White House, the Rheingard telegram, that told them, that mentioned in 1942, that Hitler had already killed 2 million Jews. And Hitler had something called the final solution. And the White House under FDR squashed that telegram. Now, he got hold of the telegram because he was the founder of the World Jewish Congress. He was the founder, he was the leader, he was the president, right? Which is still in existence today. I don't know what power they have. I don't know. Maybe they do. I think Edgar Brafman, right, is from Seagram's. He's the head now. But he got a telegram from the World Jewish Congress in Switzerland that sent him Hitler's vision of the final Jewish solution to get rid of every Jew in Europe and beyond, to kill every Jew in the world. And so he approached FDR and he says, "Did you get the telegram?" So he says, "Yes, I did get the telegram, but this is just a war rumor." And he said, "I don't believe this is just a war rumor." And he held a press conference and he let the cat out of the bag. The Jews are being killed en masse in concentration camps, or before they got to concentration camps. Kiev, Babi Yar wasn't a concentration camp. Babi Yar is where they killed hundreds of thousands of Jews before they got to the concentration camps, in the ravine where they died. So he held press conferences that were attended by thousands, and he let the cat out of the bag. And FDR refused to accept it, to believe it. FDR refused to get involved because it would take away FDR's concentration and focus on the war. So he didn't want to get into particulars of the war against the Jews. He wanted to get involved in the war. And it is for this reason that FDR did not bomb the tracks leading to Auschwitz or other train tracks leading to concentration camps. Because FDR said, if we keep them busy in the concentration camps, then we keep them out of our hair. Terrible. Lives were lost because of one man's decision. And he actually fought FDR. But he did not fight hard enough, is the criticism once again. I have insomnia. But where criticism was deserved, where criticism was really deserved, as he was the head of the WJC. And in 1941, the country, FDR, came out with a law that you cannot send anything to Germany. You cannot send anything to Germany because they are the enemy of the Allies, and therefore it is considered siding with the enemies of the Allies. So he, as the head of the WJC, came up with an edict that you are not allowed to send food to the Jews of Poland, because that is considered siding with the enemy. And he should have fought and said, what do you mean? We don't send food to the Jews of Poland, which we can guarantee you, FDR, it will get to the Jews of Poland, because we have a distribution there via the WJC or via the joint. And he didn't. Instead, he came out with his own edict. He says, stop, to every WJC chapter, stop sending food to the Jews of Poland. And now, I don't mean in the future, I don't mean shortly, but I mean now. I have no idea how many Jews in Poland died of starvation because of that particular edict. Right? You can't blame only him, because FDR had the same edict. But he should never have folded. He never should have cowered. The risk of being imprisoned, worst case scenario, because he sent food to Jews to, I would have taken that. Who cares? Get it out there. You get it out there. This is the what you have to do in order to make sure food reaches Poland. I mean, unbelievable. And so he issued the edict as well. So, to me, unbelievable. And truth be told, I mean, I wasn't there. I'm not in his shoes, but unforgivable. He was also unable, his critics say, he was unable to convince Congress to change the 1924 Immigration Act. It was a very simple Immigration Act. We are going to limit the amount of amount of immigrants that come in. There's a quota. So the argument was, okay, fine. However, 1917 had happened. The First World War had happened. Jews were at risk of dying from the Bolsheviks, from the Red Army, from the Cossacks, from help. And no, we have a quota. The United States has a quota. It can't come from here. It can't come from Europe. It can't come from and many Jews died because of that quota. And Jews try to get into the United States. They were turned around. The ship, right? Exodus. The story of Exodus. That was and he was ineffective. So while he was effective in certain things and he took bold stands, he didn't take bold stands where other things where he should have. Now, because in 1942 he was unable, or he issued that WJC edict, he was actually deposed as the president of the WJC, and someone else took over. And in fact, he was considered, even though he was pro-Zionist, so he was on the right in his day, he was also considered on the left, because he couldn't convince Congress. He WJC edict. He didn't convince FDR to publicly to go out pro-Jews. He was buried in an unmarked grave in a mausoleum, and on the Hudson River, somewhere, whether it's Henry on the Hudson, Croton on the Hudson, somewhere, and his last years he was considered not such a success. He was considered a failure. Hard to know. But so he had some good parts to him. He had some courageous acts. He had some weak acts. And but his legacy does live on in the Stephen Weiss Free Synagogues. And he's considered an icon of the Reform Jewry. Please feel free to share, and if you wish to see other previous classes, you can go to thechaycenter.com/academy. All right, God bless.